So I'm going to start. I'm just going to introduce Jullian to you all. Jullian has a fantastic website, I have to say. So Hart, is it hartproductions.com?
Yeah, Hart Productions, yeah.
There was so much there I didn't realize about you, Jullian.
I can't remember what I've written now.
well, I'd no idea that you did the first episode of Drive to Survive.
Yeah.
Has changed Formula One, I think, worldwide. Jullian is would be described as either a director who edits or an editor who directs. We might get to that later on, but he's someone who does both things. Jullian was the editor of American Animals, feature film American Animals, feature film The Girl in the Box, and also The Last Tsars and Revelation, The End of Days. I was amazed with that as well. It's very kind of Jason Bourne sort of feel to it, because I was expecting it to be kind of biblical. Documentary-wise, he did the amazing Puppet Master miniseries, which is phenomenal. He did Pele, he did Fear City, and Drive to Survive, and of course The Tinder Swindler. So phenomenal body of work. I suppose before we talk about The Deepest Breath, Julie, maybe we could talk about you and all this incredible work. And we live life forward, as they say, but we understand it looking backwards. What was all this planned? Was this where you expected to be at this stage in your life, or would the 15-year-old Jullian be
will recognize this
contented and satisfied with what the XX-year-old Jullian?
Sorry, Ferg, 1 sec. I've just got it. Mia, can you just, it's the neighbour, they just want some flowers I took in. Can you give it to them? Thanks. Sorry. Someone keeps banging on the door. It's my neighbour. I took the package in. On you. You won't get kidnapped. It's fine. I suppose, when I was a teenager, I loved film. I basically wanted to be Steven Spielberg, I think. I was just, obsessed by the movies. I think actually I kind of just wanted to not just make them. I think I just wanted to be in one. Life just looks so much more interesting in a movie and all the boring bits cut out. I was just drawn to it, and then drawn to, how they do it. But everything just seemed obviously so far away. I grew up in a suburb in a town in Tunbridge in Kent. So the idea of, even London seemed quite far away. I did a film, I did A-levels, and then I wanted to get on a film course. And so I took a year out, got a job, paid to do some courses where I kind of got a show reel, got into a film course. And then did directing and editing. And those were the two main loves. Directing just seemed impossible, to be honest. I didn't know how to go about doing that. But editing, I was like, oh, right, there's a route. You make the tea. Yay. So you make the tea.
Making?
Yeah, and then you're an assistant, hopefully, and then maybe. And that seemed like something that I could wrap my, 21, 22-year-old brain around. So yeah, I became a runner and an assistant editor, and then sort of blagged my way into my first Avid job, having read the manual.
And that was what year, if you don't mind me asking?
Probably 1998. I remember this because I remember going for the interview, and that was the World Cup where Michael Owen scored an amazing goal. And I thought, he's 18, and if he can do that in front of however many billion people are watching right now, then you can talk your way into this job. So I used Michael Owen as my kind of G-up to go into the interview. So yeah, 98.
Okay. And so your first Avid jobs, were they in documentary? Was it TV? Was it corporate? What was the?
Yeah, it was TV just about. It was a kind of satellite, Sky satellite called .TV, which was like technology. No one watched it. but we basically, I actually did some directing there as well because, you know, there was no money. There was a bunch of young people with some ideas and no experience who got let loose on stuff. So we would basically make our own things. And after the first few weeks, I would sign my own program off and it would go on air, which was nuts. And has never happened again. But, you know, that place, it was, yeah, I mean, that we were trusted to kind of get the job done and do the best we can in the time we had.
Have you kept any of that work?
I was probably on a beta SP somewhere in a loft or something. It might be something.
That's pretty unique, though, isn't it, really, to be signing off your own work at that stage in your career as well?
Yeah, I suppose it was presenter-led. And, you know, Mark Cheslak, actually, who still, he works for the BBC and still presents. I see him on LinkedIn. He does BBC technology stuff. He's a very good presenter, really nice guy. And so, you know, he would, him and Julia Doggett, the other presenter, would arrange for these shoots. They would produce and present, and we would direct and edit, basically. So it's a very small crew. You did the whole thing. You learnt on the job. We decided to do green screen one day just because we could. You know, it was kind of a freedom that I have never had again. But you learn a lot. You know,
I was smiling. I was waiting for the disaster story about the green screen, but clearly
we got a bit of advice because we were in Wandsworth Studios, and
I worked there as well once upon a time. Yeah,
and we just went and asked the lighting technicians who were working on like Countdown and, you know, stuff like that. I was like, if we did green screen, how do we do it? And then they gave us some advice and a tarp, and then we were like, great, thanks very much. And so we just went and did it. But yeah, it was very, very hard work. It was, I used to digitize all my own stuff as well. And I think the first 6 months, I added it up. I averaged 92 hours a week for 6 months. And then I had a bit of a rant at the exec and said, I just cannot do this anymore. And then he got me some overnight digitizing. So I went down to about 75. Yeah, we worked really hard on it. But yeah, there was lots of good, fun things to shoot.
I mean, we can jump around a bit in this conversation. If we were to jump then to The Deepest Breath and the phenomenon that it became, it's just an incredible film, you know, on so many levels. Between Sundance and Sheffield and just in the ether as well, the impact it had on people, how much people spoke about it. I was in Ireland I think it was July time, and it was on the main national chat radio station. Yeah, they were talking about the ethics of free diving and people risking their lives, etc. So it was part of the national debate. So it's, you know, it's such an amazing film. I rewatched it last night, and I think it's going to be, well, for me anyway, I have these lists of films like Man on Wire or Trainspotting or what have you, ones that, you know, you won't switch off once you start watching it, because the sequences are so rich and so well realized, and it plays out so dramatically, in my opinion. Can you talk a little bit, Jullian, about Jullian Hart and The Deepest Breath and how those two intersected?
Sure. Well, thank you. First, thank you very much. That's very kind thing to say, and to be, you know, talked about in the same breath as some of those films. Fantastic, but glad it had an impact on you. I would say the impact it had on you is the impact I had when I read the pitch deck. I was actually meant to do another job, and Bart Layton, who I'd known for quite a long time, who execs on the film, sent me the pitch deck, and he said, have a look at this. I said, well, I'm busy. and in the next job, and he said, "You're going to want to read it." And so I read it, and then I went, "Yeah." From the pitch deck alone, and there was a sizzle, there was like a 3-minute thing or whatever. And so, got to hear Stephen, got to hear a bit of Alessia, got to see some shots. I had a very basic grasp of freediving, but, from what I read and what I saw, I was thinking, well, obviously if we can deliver this, a love story against the backdrop of this kind of dramatic sport that is, just really, really interesting and not something that I've seen. I'm always interested in doing things that, it's a bit like Free Solo. Free Solo is sort of broken the climbing film because it's so good. So, I was really drawn to the fact that, I haven't seen this, and that's always a draw if you get the opportunity to do something where you're like, I haven't seen this yet. I mean, there's been films and obviously, Drama and The Big Blue and things like that. It's not like no one's ever done it, but, it's not saturated.
No.
Market wasn't saturated with freediving. So yeah, I read that, and then I've only backed out of about 2 jobs in my career, but I didn't leave anyone in the lurch. It was 5 months in the future, but I was very glad that I did it because it was a great experience, and it's really great to work on.
Okay, thank you. And Aoife, or should I say Agus Aoife, Caimí Rá, Báilte Ró agus Congratulations.
That's probably about the extent of my Irish.
Might be mine too. So your connection with this story, so you're Dublin based.
Yeah.
Had you worked with Motive Films with Jamie and Anne, or had you worked with Laura McGann, or how do you come into the picture?
So yeah, weirdly enough, I swim with Laura.
Oh.
So we sea swim, do some freezing cold sea swims. And she had chatted to me about this film, and it was actually months previous. And then further down the line, I knew one of the Irish producers who was working on it at the time in development. I had worked on her or with her on another feature doc, The Farthest. So she kind of brought me in initially. And it was kind of one of those ones where, and in that film as well, I was archive research and assistant editor. So kind of 2 roles that go really, like, it's really nice if you can have someone who can do both of those things, because it's like, I don't know, you just kind of seem to know everything. But it's also 2 roles which kind of grow really big, and it kind of becomes a bit too much for one person. But so initially I was kind of on an archive. It was back in 2020, I think it was September 2020. And it was, I kind of met them for a brief chat, but initially, it was mainly sorting archive, and we had Stephen's hard drive and Alessia's hard drive. They both, and it was really a matter of kind of going through and taking anything they had that was kind of useful, personal images and all that kind of thing, trying to categorize it. And also, trying to mark up if it was kind of going to be one of those ones that was going to get lost, or did we know where it was from, or it's you might get this tiny little thumbnail, and could we get a bigger image? So yeah, that was kind of the initial stages were all kind of archive sorting and hunting and that kind of stuff before there was an editor. I can't remember when Jullian. I'm trying to remember when Jullian started.
Oh, when did I start? Oh God, now you're asking.
Yeah, I know. Or even when they started shooting stuff. So I mean, initially it was so archive based. They hadn't actually they hadn't gotten to the stage where it was shooting stuff where you were kind of ingesting loads and loads of material. Yeah, that was kind of the.
Well, as somebody who knows, sorry to interrupt you, as somebody who knows Laura, Laura is a very accomplished camera operator herself. Well, I haven't looked that closely at the credits. Were there any aspects that Laura had shot? Was it always going to be Tim who was the cinematographer on it?
I don't think Laura shot anything on this. No, I think she was always. Yeah, writer director. I think as far as I know, because I think certainly for the first shoot, I think it was Eleanor Bowman might have done the first kind of initial interviews, and then it was again too big a job for her to be shooting anything on.
Okay.
In terms of the workload, she was full-time director.
Gotcha. Thank you. Actually, on that note, Jullian, I have a question. I mean, the underwater photography is obviously it's completely stunning. I was playing a game trying to differentiate what had been filmed especially for the movie and what you guys had gathered from already filmed stuff. I mean, they've got just phenomenal cameras at those events.
It's a real mix. I mean, to be honest, when we were going through footage, as Eva will well know, it's literally the evolution of GoPro, our kind of rushes, because you could see, stuff from the very early times. We had every frame rate under the sun because, people they just grab a camera and they'd film this stuff. Luckily they did, but so we would have stuff from, probably about 15 years worth of stuff. But sometimes you play a bit of a puzzle of trying to work out, oh, right, that is that event. I mean, these people aren't like, they just like being in the sea. They're not people who necessarily even answer emails most of the time. We had some people, especially like Alexei Molchanov, the Russian champion. we just couldn't get hold of him for months because they just work on a different plane. And so we were trying to work out, like, sometimes you go, oh yeah, I think that is actually that event. And the event coverage got better as years went on.
Yeah.
And also their own technology develops, like the dive eye, the shots that follows the dive down at the very beginning and comes up. There are years where that doesn't exist. And then there's a year or two when they're using it every now and again. And then now, if you watch it, they live stream it. Everyone's got a dive eye every dive. So
can you explain what a dive eye is, please?
So it's what they call the technology. It's just so at the beginning of the film, Alessia drops down and the camera goes all the way down to the bottom, the base plate, which is where they have the tag that they have to pick up as proof that they reach that depth and take the tag up to the surface. And the camera goes all the way down. There's another angle that points up at the base plate, so you can clearly see they've got it. And then the same rig goes up. The same camera goes up. I watched loads of dives without any dive eye, and what you're mainly watching is someone disappearing into the black.
Yeah.
Then a lot of nothing. And then you see the base plate shot, and then you see them going up. So when I first saw that, I was like, right, finally, because unlike free solo, where all you need to do is point the camera down from the top of the mountain to the bottom and see Alex Honnold and go, oh my god, you don't have any perspective of what's around you. It's just black. So depth becomes a question of time, and it becomes a question of sound, which is, how that opening came to pass. Because we were like, how do we get this across? Because the worst, we absolutely wanted to avoid, lots of people saying it's the most dangerous thing you've ever seen in your entire life. That kind of montage, because it's just people telling you without experiencing and how hard this is. So when I finally saw that dive, I was like, yeah, that'll do it.
was that for that opening dive? Was that real time or not?
A little inside. We actually took a tiny bit of time out of it.
Okay.
It's even longer, but there was a worry that people would get bored. And she was actually not a lot, probably about 7-8 seconds, but it's actually slightly shorter.
Okay.
So she's, all that time she's holding her breath, and obviously that's what we wanted. We wanted everyone to ideally sit in a dark room and and see if they can hold their breath and see how far you get just sitting on your backside without swimming, and failing. So that was in cut one, that dive.
Okay. So that was the opening of the movie since cut one.
Yeah, it was, because it kind of just we just didn't want to have to. It did a lot of work for us, because you got the experience, you understood it, you understood what the person was doing, and you also understood, because of the ending, that it looked dangerous. So, and it also had our two characters in it.
Yeah.
Stephen and Alessia. So it did what we wanted to do, which was a cinematic opening where we could just let people see something happen, understand the concept, and then we'd pick up the film after that.
We not usually wouldn't ask this, I think, on these chats, but I'm curious to know how you would go about building sequences, and whether Aoife was involved or not. But in terms of, because there's a huge risk that it just becomes another dive and another dive and another dive, and beautiful blue sea and dangerous and deep and everything. And how did you approach that element of it?
Well, we did. There was an original script that Aoife kindly assembled. That took a while, didn't it?
I'd forgotten about that, actually, until you asked. Yeah.
And was that so? How was that script set out, Aoife? Was it like one-liners for each beat, or was it?
Yeah, kind of. Like, we had done scripts. This is kind of techie, avid, boring stuff, but we had script sync for a lot of the things, which is kind of, you can search for a word or you can search for a phrase. So that kind of allowed us to jump into a lot of, or allowed me to kind of jump back and find a lot of the clips where someone was saying a certain thing. But I think Laura had done the script, as far as I know.
She had done the script
and had a lot of detail. And then there was kind of chunks of, it'd be an interview, a chunk of archive, a chunk of this. So it was kind of, and some of the things it would be kind of very clear where it was from. And then other things you might be going like, oh, this is a needle in a haystack, so go find it. So, but that's, I think that definitely probably was like, it probably was a good place to build from. Although, seeing that, like thinking back to what that was and what the end product was.
They're not, because I think on paper, what Laura and was working out with Bart was was using the kind of the Bahamas World Record dive as a kind of basis, as an anchor. Okay. And it was kept going back to this point in time. So Aoife very painstakingly assembled what was like, I think it was about 4 hours or 4.5, 5 hours of material from this idea. But what became clear is that it was just too complicated. And I'm a big fan of KISS, Keep It Simple, Sailor. And just, it wasn't what we wanted to do. And it was actually structurally became quite clear to think of when you were like, well, this is a story of two people. And that was crucial because, and the whole reason Deepest Breath happened was because of Stephen. It's because Laura found Stephen's story, not Alessia's. So we never set out to make a film about, here's a world champion, here's this sporting hero, It was always about these two people. And so in order to give Stephen, because Stephen obviously, it has a tragic end, and, he ends up saving two people's lives. But, this also ends his own life. We knew that if we always looked at Stephen through the prism of a tragic hero, you're robbing him of his vitality in the story, because you're always looking at him through a certain lens. and also looking at her through Alessia through a certain lens. So once we realised that we just wanted to follow them, their hopes and dreams from as a youngster through to the time when they met, then that was enough complexity, because you were bouncing between two different stories that don't correlate for a little while. She's as a 13-year-old or even younger, she's obsessed by this thing, and Stephen doesn't really know what he wants to do. Apart from having this love of nature and the wild that manifests itself in fishing in Ireland and watching David Attenborough, and eventually, in his early 20s, just seeing the world before he finds the thing that really strikes a chord with him, freediving.
I liked how there were none of the sentences were overly long. For example, it was all quite bite-sized, but I came away with quite a deep understanding of a fairly complex world with its own set of norms and everything. And so you did a great job, I think, of just peppering it and smuggling in those factoids, and when one needed to know those things. It's a great achievement just on that simple basis, I think, and a non-dramatic basis.
Because you've always got that thing, haven't you, when you're like, all right, people need to know certain things. So it's always like, well, when do they need to know them? And also how much? Because you can obviously over-explain. It's actually an incredibly technical sport. And there's so many things that we did not go into because they actually are not relevant. And when we did need to know things about the competition, it'd be like, right, just before you see it, so you can understand what's happening in the competition, So, we try to, we work quite hard at keeping the messaging clear and to a minimum, because it is a turn off, that kind of exposition. It's like, here's a load of factoids that are coming at you. It's kind of very easy to put off the audience. So we have to be quite targeted with those. Yeah.
And was that part of your role, Aoife, breaking down the long chunks, or I should explain to people a few things at this point in time, especially anyone here from BAFTA. This is all an editor's chat, so we get quite into the reads with things. We're proudly kind of geeky about it all. We'll speak for an hour or so. I'll try and keep things moving along, and there will be questions as well. Keep putting them into the chat. I'm trying to remember what I was going to ask you, Aoife. Essentially, I think this edit occurred during lockdown as well, of course. It was that, and how one manages to manage the storytelling between you, with one in Dublin and one in the UK.
I'd say now they probably wouldn't have done it that way had they had the foresight. But at the time, I think when I came on, I'm not sure if any Ventureland were even on board. So it kind of ended up that I ended up being there already, and it was kind of too late to get rid of me. I knew too much. So I think we had a pretty good. I think there was like a few WhatsApp groups. There was, I know, like myself and Jullian would often just have a call in the morning or something, or if anything was happening. It actually worked like surprisingly well, I would say, considering. And I was I guess we were kind of at a certain stage going into it that it had already kind of reached a certain point. That we both had the material as well to work on. That was probably the hardest part, was actually just the physical media, because they would go off on a shoot. It would come back to me in Ireland. Mm-hmm. I would transcode it all. And then I would be trying to get it over to Jullian as fast as possible. You're kind of trying to sync it, or you're transcoding it. You're sending over the transcoded files, and then you're still kind of working away on the, grouping and syncing and all that kind of stuff. In the hope that you can kind of get that done. So Jullian gets the files, and then you throw in the bins by email later. So, I'm sure. I don't know actually, because so basically I had to leave or towards the end, I went to work full time on another project. So Emiliano kind of took over, and he was London based. So maybe that was a bit easier when you could bike courier drives over.
I suppose apart from the fact that the courier was cheaper, because if it was a really big drop, we had to, if you can do like 30 gigs at a time and download them in the background whilst you're working, and it's fine. But obviously, if you get this huge shoot and you've got like a couple of terabytes or something ridiculous, then that's not very workable. But we would obviously send a drive over from Ireland to London. But when Emiliano was here, even though he was in London, he was somewhere else in London, and it would be a thing. He would just be transferring me sending me the drops. So to be honest, it was no different. I would be on the phone to him, and then we'd chats. And I mean, that's a good thing about Avid's database, is it is stable and it just works. You send the bins, you send the media, ping, it's there. So it did work pretty well, So, and Aoife had done a great job on the organisation and the labelling, and so all those things are really, they're not always done well. They're so crucial especially when you get to the end and you try and work out how to clear it all. So all that stuff was in place, but we would just, like Aoife said, we would have those calls and say, well, I would plan ahead and go, if Aoife looks at these things and tries to find me these things that Laura's talking about, I can be doing this thing, and then by the time she's done that, and so we just keep the mouse wheel spinning, and keep the jobs churning through, basically.
I don't know how fresh it is in your memory, Jullian. You talked about cut one, and maybe both of you end to end. I'm guessing, Aoife, you started prior to Jullian on this, so there's a number of months. I'm going to guess it's multiple months rather than weeks in any case. And Jullian, likewise, I'm hoping it's measured in months rather than years. Your end of things.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember. It was a bit of the only grey area is how many times we locked it, because we locked it. It was a sale, so we locked it quite a few. There wasn't right. So we have Laura, the director. We have two producers from Motive, Jamie and Anne. And then we have John Batsek and Sarah Thompson from Ventureland, and then funded by A24. So we've got Adriana Banta, Ben Kotner, and Emily. Surnames escapes me, but a lot of people. To start with, and so everyone had to be happy. Obviously, not everyone has the exact, but as a group, happy. And then when we got to that stage, then it was put out to sale, and we got a lot of interest. And then that process begins. It's the first time I'd actually done a sale. Everything else I'd done for Netflix was a direct commission. Mm-hmm. And obviously the value of the direct commission is they're on the journey. So they've seen the progress. So there was a certain amount of probably due diligence by Netflix going, we love it, we want it. Have you thought? and and they would come up with these things, and we'd thought very long and very hard for a very long time. But we got to a point politically where we would try these things out. I mean, to be honest, the cut that we locked and the cut that Netflix, took to Sundance, there's really not that many changes. It's pretty minor stuff, but there was a real interrogation of absolutely everything, and also some of it was just literally showing people and saying, well, this is the other thing we can do. And it's so much easier for people to then to go, oh, okay, I see why you've done that now. But so, I'd probably say, I think it was between 32 and 35 weeks or 36 weeks maybe ish, I think.
Okay.
But it kind of dribbled on a bit, because there would be, and another thing.
Yeah.
Over a period of time. So,
but it sounds like there was a little bit of tiny bit of shortening, a little bit of sharpening, but overall we've managed to maintain That you got the film?
Yeah, it wasn't really a duration. I mean, to be honest, my sounds bad to say, but when I locked it on Friday for the, I don't know, 5th time at 2 a.m, and then at 9:30 on a Saturday, John Batsek's calling me. I'm like, right, great news. I'm like, yeah. He went, Netflix have bought it. I was like, right. I was like, yeah. And just waiting for the bit where I come into this.
Yeah.
So he was like, they'll probably want a few changes. So, I was like, yeah, okay. So it kind of went away and came back a couple of times. Well, I had to take a little bit of a break from my following job just to kind of deal with a few things. Because I was trying to do some stuff at the weekends, while the other job was going on. But then it gets to a point where you're like, I actually need a block of a couple of weeks here. You've got too many things you want me to look at.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's a lot of due diligence. I mean, there was a particular the moment of Alessia's arrival in the film. There are 52 versions of that moment.
Wow. I might actually read out a question because it's asking about your approach to the rolling out and introducing. I think that's what they're saying. Sven and Olav, apologies for my mispronunciation. I thoroughly enjoyed the movie and appreciated many of your creative decisions. The second half of the film stands out as its strongest aspect. I do have some reservations about the first half, particularly in how Stephen is introduced into the story and the relatively brief parallel cuts between their narratives. It strikes me as somewhat unmotivated. Have you ever considered delving deeper into Alicia's emotional journey before introducing Stephen? In my opinion, there's enough excitement and depth in Alicia's character to sustain our engagement without the need for a premature introduction of Stephen. You get the gist of it, I think.
Yeah. No, I understand the question. I think I don't know if sorry, but is it Sven? Sorry.
Sven Olav, is it?
Sven.
So if you want to join in, Sven, it's no problem if you want to clarify anything.
I mean, I don't know if Sven heard us earlier when we were talking about, but it kind of goes back to the idea that it was always both their stories. And we always saw, I mean, the bottom line is Stephen doesn't have as much archive as Alessia because he's not a world champion. And, we had what we had of him, and we could tell a lot of his story, but, you always want more of your characters, but we knew that there was a limit. But I totally understand why people might think, well, this is a film about her, because, the usual narrative is, well, we're doing a film about world champion and this person is our focus. But for us, in order to keep them as much as we could as equals whose stories will combine, it was really important that Stephen's story started in parallel with Alessia's. So we could have really focused on her and then maybe brought him in much later. But it was incredibly important, especially to Laura, that it was both their stories and that Stephen's voice was just as important as Alessia's.
Gotcha. Yeah, I loved all that. I loved the way he was brought in. Actually, can I hit you with another one, guys? Can you talk about the choice to include the disclaimer at the top about additional archive and reconstruction? That's from Ron.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of conversation about that. There's a kind of, I think in our current climate of critique and analysis on documentaries, people are incredibly hot on the provenance of everything. And we had a lot of coverage of certain things. I mean, the shot where Stephen is saving Alessia, that is him saving Alessia. That is his last act caught on camera.
Wow.
The shot of her going down and really, from the other side of the arch and coming out, that's all. Yeah,
he's kind of flipping diagonally across our screens in a hurry. swimming.
So that's the real thing. But there are things, and it would be everything from it was decided that we needed so that the audience could never claim, or to be honest, more importantly, critics who can really damage your film at festivals might be critical and say you're trying to pass some shots off as pure verite when they're not.
Can you remind us what the disclaimer was in any case? What was it? This is based on a true story. Everything you see is fine.
Yeah, it was basically saying something like with, this film has been put together with original footage and some reconstructions. And the reconstruction, there's not much. It's a few angles of Alessia on the dive. It's actually a couple of shots of Stephen when he saves the Russian world champion.
Okay,
That's about it. But it was considered that there was a big debate about whether you even need to do this. But John Batzek in particular, has an extreme, very experienced director and producer, very experienced in not just film, but what's happening in marketplaces and in critical thinking. And it was decided that we needed to do this. We needed to say that so that no one could say, hold on, the whole film's ruined for me because of that shot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, if I can.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think sometimes, especially when archive is used, I think the audience is really smart. And when a shot of archive keeps being reused and reused, it's quite exhausting. So actually to do the reconstruction and like Jullian weaved it in so seamlessly, I think it sometimes just it keeps your focus on the story rather than going and there's another shot of archive. Oh, they've used the same shot of her turning around doing this thing. So yeah, when I saw the finished film, I just thought it was really nicely done. That it really helped smooth over those moments where maybe because there was so many great pieces of archive. I just thought where there might have been a moment missing, it kind of just helped that little transition so that the audience wasn't kind of snapped out of the story.
My guess is that I think there's the point where they're going under whatever that's called again, that the hole or the loop or
the arch, yeah.
The arch, yeah. And she's swimming underneath the coral. Was it that shot of the... Yeah,
I mean, the shot actually underneath with her is it is not a lie. That is the most dangerous dive site on Earth. There's actually a shot, a geography shot that tilts so that there's a technical diver, so someone on the scuba, looking up at the sky, and you see, and it goes down, and then you see the arch. There's one of those that exists, and we looked through so much stuff because it's not filmed. That place is just not filmed because it's dangerous for every single diver to go down there. A lot of the people who die down there aren't free divers; they're scuba divers.
Oh gosh!
So, we couldn't if we wanted a shot to kind of, get a sense of her underneath, we couldn't say to Alessia, can you just go under the most dangerous dive site in the world where a tragedy happened? So, there was a couple of shots that were filmed in Mexico that allowed you to get the experience of her just going under that rock. But like I say, her descent, her going in from that angle, her coming out from the other angle, Stephen saving her, that's real. Those are the last acts, of that day. But in order for the audience to understand geography and understand certain story beats, we did need to arrange for a couple of things to be filmed, basically.
That was Alicia. That was her coming to the surface. That was a genuine shot of her surfacing, and he presumably was somewhere below.
Yes, when you see him kicking really, really hard,
Yes, I remember that.
Going all the way up. That is that's it. That's him saving her life, and so that photo, obviously, that oh crikey, what was her name? But no, our photographer. Oh my God, how have I forgotten her name? Anyway, our Czech photographer, who's interviewed, that's the photo that she took.
Okay.
So all that is, the real thing, and obviously their preparation for the dives, and things like that, and saving Alexei coming up, and when Stephen saved Alexei, the Russian male world champion, that's real. There were a couple of shots that were picked up, but our intention was to not draw attention to it. So if we needed a bit more storytelling for the audience to understand it, it was done in the style that they would film it in.
Was it debated a lot how far to go with that awful tragedy? The diver who I think may have had the world record, who perished, may have had the lung damage.
Mavoli.
Mavoli, was it?
Mavoli, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's not. There were photos of him that we had to be very careful of. I don't think there were ever any footage. The coverage there was less coverage of the event back when he died, to begin with. But obviously, he died. And, the photos that we used were really focusing on Will Trubridge and the other medic, who you could see literally trying to save his life with a syringe, with adrenaline and oxygen. But yeah, I mean, you're obviously dealing with death and, his family and things like that. So you just want to focus on the storytelling of people understanding how dangerous it is, and how something like that could happen. Because what happened to Nick is almost like the straw that broke the camel's back. He would get these damage to the lungs that accumulates over time, and you have one too many of those, you have this huge bleed, and that can be it.
Keep the questions coming into the chat. I wanted to ask you a question selfishly that I know a little bit the answer to, but about your scene construction and your use of sound. Like I kind of nerdishly love the way you kind of put the sound of the cars really loudly coming in, rather than just you play very much, it feels to me, with absence and fullness of sound, and the dive sequences. I'd love to know about the rhythms of the bubbles and the movement and the heartbeats. And what was your interpretation to that? And I guess darkness and light comes into it as well. And how much of that was from the edit? How much was actually created within the dub at the end?
Well, the sound, it was definitely one of the things when I first, read the pitch deck. I was like, well, the sound design, this could be. A lot of docs just don't have the space. They don't have it's not that relevant. You get a really nice mix, you get a very professional mix, but there's not necessarily the storytelling opportunities for sound. Whereas this was like, sound. And so the opening, I did a kind of, got a track lay on it, because we never wanted music on it. So it was like, right, we're just going to tell this with the sound. Can we get an idea?
Minutes or whatever.
And the heartbeat idea just came out of the actual science of it, which is your heart slows. And I read up at how much the heart will slow by. So when the heart is getting slower and slower and slower, that's how slow it gets. But obviously, when you're hearing that as a human, when anyone's heartbeat gets really slow, you're like, it doesn't. It's a warning sign, isn't it? It doesn't feel good. So as a storytelling idea, the actual what is actually happening to Alessia's body as she goes down and comes up, we could do that through sound as well as getting that sense of the depth and the changes. And so we did. I did a kind of a track lay good enough to kind of go, oh, well, we get the idea, and then kind of convince Robert Ford, the producer, said, Robert, can we get the guys at Monaire to, do some sound design? Because we need to sell it. You've got to sell it. You're trying to do an opening to a film with a really long scene at the front and no one talks and there's no music. And it says you've got to sell it. And so really good sound designer called Chad Orororo, who worked on Fear City with which again had a lot of sound design. And the process we had on Fear City was myself and editor Tom Parsons, who did episode 2. We would create these little sections. So you're hearing the mob. Fear City is about.
I've seen it and loved it. Yeah, about the mob and the mafia, etc.
So the 80s, the FBI are trying to take down the mob. Get Gotti, the sequel, has just come out and just dropped on Netflix. A lot of the same kind of people involved, but so they're listening to the mob, on headphones and trying to work out what they're saying. So we would do the sound design, like we would do for one section. We wanted like the sound of all these mobsters talking as we fly over the city. We cut it. We gave it to Chad. We did a basic mix. Gave him a load of stuff. He would just give us this thing back, and it would be amazing. And you go, right, we need more time, because once its sound gets good, you need space and time for it.
Oh, it affected how you were cutting the sequence.
Yeah. So we were basically because it's like as soon as it's that good, you're like, longer. You need another 10 seconds on this because it will hold up because it's telling the story.
Yeah.
And so that process with Chad was really good because while the offline was still going on, we would send stuff to Chad. He would send it back. It would always get longer, and then we'd have these opportunities for the sound to tell the story. And so Chad got the opening and did a kind of great job on, an insane amount of sound design work, to sell it basically. And then he actually left Monaire, went freelance, but the sound design team at Monaire also did some other sections, such as, when we're explaining her fear of the dark, and it's very quiet and kind of eerie. There are a few other sections we got them to work on. So again, the level would get to a level where we can, you're always trying to sell the cuts to your producers and director and everyone. And if it is sounding cinematic and making people uneasy, then you're winning. So yeah, sound design was happening whilst the offline was going on.
Wow, that's great to know. Actually, it's fascinating, especially if it's how it was affecting. One was informing the other, if you like, in the process. I've realised I've only just looked at my watch, and the time is ticking towards 8:30. If anyone has any questions, you'd need to get them in the chat now. I think I'm going to start winding down. I think I promised Jullian and Aoife that it would be an hour that we would spend on the event. Is there anything before we finish up that either of you would like to say about the film and the experience, and anything unusual or noteworthy?
Aoife?
I'm trying to think now. I'm like, anything unusual.
On the spot.
God, I don't know. I guess it was just I guess part of the reason why you make a film like that is when you come across that incredible amount of archive, or having that much archive on the two main characters is really was probably pretty unique to start with. And for me, that was like a big that was quite exciting to work on. Yeah, just to see like how much of their story actually was there, especially someone like Stephen in the noughties, a guy in his 20s who had made all these kind of home videos and personal recordings. I mean, I don't know any guys who've done that, and especially when he traveled so much. So yeah, I guess that was pretty unique for this film, just to have that like initial big chunk of archive was pretty nice to kind of sink your teeth into.
Was there much additional archive then from Jullian? From Jullian, from Stephen, excuse me.
I mean, there were, I watched every
photos.
Yeah, I mean, his travels. I mean, he's the most traveled man I've come across ever.
Yeah.
And I mean, he did literally not many countries in Africa he didn't go to, of the 32 or whatever there are, or more. He did North America, South America, Asia, Australia. He was a very well-traveled individual. And he did these, there's like 12 hours of him talking about his travels. He was interviewed actually by a local, was he a local journalist?
A radio DJ or something.
Yeah.
A very radio voice.
Was that how you got his voice in the film?
That's where the majority of his voice came from. Is this gentleman sitting down and having a really in-depth,
it's lovely, clean
conversation for hours and hours.
Yeah.
It only took us to a certain point in his story, but like Aoife says, like these days, there's we're filming everything a lot of the time. I've got so many photos and videos of my daughter compared to what's available of me, back then, so he is in the kind of, I think he starts mucking around with a video camera when he's like 16, 17, but it was just great to have that resource. I mean, to be honest, that enabled it to be possible, because we needed Stephen to have a voice, and we, going back to the whole thing of seeing someone through a certain lens as the tragic hero or whatever, just keeping him alive and keeping them equal. And that enabled us, that resource of Stephen's enabled us to keep them equal.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to choose an answer you'd like to choose a question, Jullian, you'd like to answer.
Oh, sorry, I can't see them.
Your Tasted and Influence, a great documentary you think everyone should watch. How do you choose your projects? Is that it? What specifics attract you to a project? And then also, you spend there was somebody asked about free driving itself and how you feel about it, and then something about interviewing the fathers. Were there interviews done quite late in the editing process? So I don't know if we can answer all those things unless you can just
we can probably get through quite quickly. I mean, the fathers, Peter, Stephen's father, was done first, and that was one of the original ones we had.
Yeah.
But Enzo, Alessia's father, was done last, or practically last, because obviously Stephen's father was done before COVID existed, and then we were allowed, the world was opening up, but you're still dealing with an elderly man in Italy, so we didn't get his interview till quite late in the process. For example, I couldn't cut the beginning. The first thing I cut was Stephen's death, was the actual event, because even though we didn't have Enzo for it, when you're trying to work out how do I get into this film, it's like, well, I definitely know how it ends, so
okay.
And having gone through all the interviews and how beautifully, especially his friends, Christoph's interview, he talks about how he wished he could have been there to save him. I remember crying watching the interview rushes, because he spoke so movingly, and you just felt for him, because he just literally wanted to save him and thought he could have done if he had been there. And once I saw that, I was like, I'm going to build that. And it's also one of those things that with a director you haven't worked with before, you want to show them something. So you go, yeah, I can do it. You know what I mean? It'll be fine. To give them a bit of a sense that, you're on the right page as well. So we kind of built that. Obviously, we didn't even have all the shots, but we had the main event. So my approach generally is, do a radio play with music to get the storytelling and the emotion right, and then we had some we had his saving her in, but even in a really rough form, you could see that was going to be a very powerful scene.
Okay.
So Enzo came in late to that process, so we knew a certain amount. We knew certain things we wanted to point his interview in a certain direction, and he really delivered on that, luckily, because specifically we wanted to talk about fate, and the idea of these two people intersecting. And I think Laura asked the question, and then he just went. He just went off. He's just someone he's very religious, and everything is for a reason. And so he really brought those kind of the idea together that these two people were going to meet and that they were important to each other.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was a question from Pip. A quick one for you. After doing the project, would you ever do free diving? Yes, no. Aoife, yes, no. Jullian?
No way.
Don't think so. Don't think so.
Both of you, a documentary that you'd recommend for everybody?
To watch.
To watch.
What have I enjoyed recently? All the Beauty and the Bloodshed is phenomenal.
Loved it, yeah.
I thought that was amazing. I think that was the last feature doc I thought was really stunning.
Okay, we're winding up here.
Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed the Wham one.
Me too.
For its music.
And both of you, what will attract you to agree, disagree to a project, to edit, direct, to archive research, assist, or edit? Where are you at these days, Aoife? Are you doing more of the archive research, more of the
last two ones I've actually been assistant editing. One was a wildlife one about set in Transylvania, and the other one is a kind of not a feature, it's multiple part for about GAA football. So I mean, that's not.
Oh, I think I know the director of that actually.
Oh, do you? Yeah.
Is it Pat?
Oh, but so Pat was on it initially, and now they have someone else who's directing at the moment. Yeah. But yeah, okay. So it's yeah.
Okay.
It's not my specialist subject area, but as always, and just always learning on the job. Neither was free diving, so.
Yeah. Okay, well, amazing film. Congratulations again with it. And Jullian, what attracts you? What makes you decide fairly swiftly?
Well, I suppose for years it was like, well, I need a job, and then in the last few years we've been lucky enough to have more choice, more options. I think it's just something new. I like doing things. I haven't done it. I haven't done anything like Deepest Breath. Great. Tinder Swindler. I was like, I've never done anything like this, and also I haven't. The closest thing was Don't Fuck with Cats, probably, but I still hadn't seen anything that was telling a story through someone's phone. So I was like, immediately, it's different, and so that's always a big pull for me. Is it different? Is it different for me? And ideally, two things: is it different for me, and is it different from a lot of what's out there? That is, and obviously, the good story is a given.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of those.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much, everyone. If anybody can mute themselves now, just if we just want to say thank you very much to you both, and thanks to everyone who's come along, and thank you for all the questions and all the comments. And I'm sorry for any mispronunciations or if we've overlooked anyone. Just cheers to Cheers to you all, and thanks again. Congratulations again.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you
Cheers, everyone.
so much. Thank you.
Cheers, thanks.
Cheers.